Hello, and welcome to Axiom, where we share, discuss, and practice methods for living a happier, healthier, and more fulfilled life. I'm Ryan, and today we're taking a little diversion to set up our episode about ethics, which will come next. Today's episode will cover the subject of free will versus determinism. The Axiom team realized while writing material for the ethics episode that much of the language depends on how you understand the nature of consciousness. And since we were already planning to cover the topic of free will versus determinism, we thought now would be an opportune time to do so. And before we begin, let us openly say that much of the information in this video is going to be a restatement of Kurzgesagt's video on this subject, which was released nearly a year ago. We will add the link to that video in the description, should you care to reference it. You. What are you? What is you? Well, as we at Axiom have theorized before in Chapter 1a, you're a thing which feels, perceives, acts, and tries to become happier. This makes sense, right? You're a thing which makes choices, choosing which course of action to take in any given situation. And it seems like you can do this totally up to you, maybe influenced by some outside factors, but you ultimately have control over your own actions, right? Well, if you have ever even brushed up against someone with much interest in science or philosophy, you've probably been told that's not actually true. You might have been told it's not accurate to say you do anything. That is to say, there's nothing you ever do to affect the outcome of any situation. That feeling of you having autonomous control over your actions is actually an illusion. This theory states that since all things are caused and our minds are things, then minds must be entirely caused by other things. And just like any caused things, their reactions are never up to them, they're up to what came before them, and what comes after is never up to them either. Just like how a rock falls from a cliff when pushed by another rock, and has no choice but to fall and hit the water below with a big splash, so too humans are just forced by previous events, don't have choice, and don't actually affect our outcomes. This belief is called determinism, meaning that all events in existence are completely caused or determined by prior events. And this concept hasn't just remained behind university walls. It's even been explored by popular films and TV shows, such as Inception, The Shining, Westworld, Minority Report, Hereditary, and others. Each of these films and shows explore the idea that our minds might not actually be able to affect the future like we think they do, painting the possibility that maybe our perception of being in control of our actions is actually illusory. Well, here is why we at Axiom aren't quite convinced of this. In fact, we think the common sense, instinctual understanding of actually being in control of your actions is probably entirely correct. This is known as the free will stance. Contrary to determinism, it states that you have autonomous control over your own actions. Although at the end of the day, we don't think it changes that much about the way we live, we do think it's important to provide a defense for this idea, when most scholarship is frankly probably on the other side of this matter, promoting the idea of determinism. So let's get into why people often assume determinism is true, and why we think those reasons fall short, and why you do have control over your actions, as well as the future, that you do, in fact, have free will. There are two main points that will be made in this video. 1. That the reasons commonly put forward to prove determinism do not in fact prove determinism. In fact, the world looks just like we would expect it to if we have free will. 2. Even if determinism is true, free will language and thinking is inescapable. At the end of the day, whatever we call happiness is still the ultimate goal of life, whether consciousness is an illusion or not. Arguments for determinism, the belief that all our actions are caused by things outside our control, go back well before modern science. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, as well as other Stoic and Epicurean philosophers, stated that everything which happens to you has been waiting to happen to you since the beginning of time. The Greek philosopher Leucippus argued that nothing happens at random, but everything happens for a reason and by necessity. In the 18th century, philosopher and encyclopedist Baron d'Holbach was a staunch proponent of determinism, believing that human actions, like all other events in the universe, are determined by external causes and follow the laws of physics. He argued that free will is an illusion, and that humans, like other physical objects, are simply reacting to stimuli according to these natural laws. Today, neuroscientists such as David Eagleman and Robert Sapolsky are leading figures promoting determinism from a neurological perspective. Frankly, we don't want to be derogatory toward anyone holding a deterministic view. We think free will and determinism are two highly understandable ways of viewing the universe, and don't think either position really deserves mockery. For determinism, it can actually seem pretty straightforward. Nearly everything around us appears to be caused. If we use the analogy of the coin from Chapter 1c, by looking at only this one side, the perspective can seem very obvious. Things don't seem to happen randomly or for no reason. Trees fall because they're cut down or decay. Rocks break because they collide at a certain speed. And in addition to common observation, haven't there been scientific studies which have proven that our minds react to things even before we are aware of them? Well, let's take both of these claims one by one. First, the notion that everything seems caused, and let's see if there can be another side to this coin we're looking at. When we look around at rocks or nature, or even try to understand a mathematical equation, these things seem to follow rules that never change. If a rock falls with X speed, it will land with Y force. If the area of a triangle is a certain amount, that's because the formula for this is 1/2 base times height. Nearly everything we can observe follows these causal rules, which allow us to accurately predict the result of different systems. This applies to physics, biology, chemistry, astronomy. Basically everything seems entirely caused by something else. Everything, that is, except one crucial example, and that is the universe. From Google to leading scientists such as astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson or theoretical physicist Sean Carroll, much credence is often given both to the idea that the universe is infinite or finite. Obviously, we know the observable universe is finite, but that is just due to our limited ability to observe it, not because that's all there is to the universe. Tyson himself has said in an interview that we're pretty sure the universe goes well beyond our horizon. We don't know how far, and it's possibly infinite. Now consider this implication. If the universe is infinite, and if space-time is the same thing, as most scientists would say, then truly nothing caused the universe. There was never a time or place where the universe was not. It never had a beginning and thus was never caused. Now consider the alternative, that the universe is finite. That would mean it did have a beginning. It had a first event to happen. That would mean that that event was not caused by anything prior to it. So in both scenarios, the universe is uncaused at its core. While there may be some other third kind of option, where the universe is neither finite nor infinite, we really have even less reason to believe in it than these two. For axiom, we take the stance that the universe is infinite, that this is not something our brains can fully comprehend, but still makes the most sense of any of the available options. So if our best explanation of the universe is that it is not itself caused, is it unreasonable to think that that phenomenon may exist elsewhere in the universe also? Well, there are those who say that the quantum field does not operate off of deterministic principles either, but rather more probabilistic ones. Its actions, such as radioactive decay, quantum fluctuations, or particle emission, occur at unpredictable times not describable by current physics. Now, to be frank, the quantum field and smaller physical scales are so difficult to study, interpret, or communicate that we think it's better left as not a solid case for either side of the causality question. But we do know that our minds are incapable of comprehending certain quantum processes, as well as the universe being uncaused. So we need to be careful not to rule out options just because they don't seem causally intuitive. But if our universe at the smallest and largest scale potentially does not operate by causality, then it simply seems like quite the coincidence that our brains, often called the most complicated object in the universe, go around believing they too possess this attribute of not being entirely caused. We actually have the sense that we ourselves generate causal chains of events. We seem to believe that the choice to kick a rock off a cliff, which makes a big splash in a river, starts with our decision in our head. Because of this, we don't see conclusive reasons to think that everything in the universe operates by determinism. We think that the idea that minds and consciousness have the ability to autonomously initiate causal chains is far from overturned. Now, the other main support for determinism often comes from modern scientific studies. The newest and most cited study in this area was done in 2008 by neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes and published in Nature Neuroscience. In the study, 14 volunteers were connected to an fMRI brain scanner and were told to tap a button with either their left or right hand whenever they felt the urge. When the research team later analyzed the brain scans, they found that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is involved with thought and consciousness, sometimes would light up as much as 7 seconds before the subjects pressed the button. This has often been interpreted to mean that all the neurological processes are set in motion in order to complete the task well before an individual is aware of it. While this may seem like an open and shut case at first, the prefrontal cortex also happens to be in control of planning, working memory, organizing information, regulating social behavior, and speech and language, among other things. With only the information that the prefrontal cortex lit up, we are still in the dark about which of these operations was active. It could easily be that the volunteer was planning which button to press, becoming conscious of their social surroundings, remembering what buttons they had pressed previously, thinking about what to say after having pressed the button, or any combination of these. Without more information from the researchers, we can't conclude this brain activity solely indicated decision-making. And what's more, In this study, when the brain signals were deciphered with a computer program, the researchers could only predict which button a subject would press about 60% of the time. With only 14 participants, this is only slightly better than a random guess. We shouldn't be surprised that there are physical activities going on in our bodies well before we report our decisions. Our eyes may start to dilate due to feelings of love, fear, anger, or excitement well before we decide to say we are feeling those emotions. We might start sweating well before we realize we are warm, and our brains might prepare information, memories, or make plans well before we actually decide which course of action to take. Studies like this certainly are valuable for understanding the physical systems which allow us to experience life, but we should take care not to overstate the conclusions as proof when they are not. In fact, each study done by these neuroscientists actually looks exactly like what we would expect them to if we did have free will. The free will theory posits that our consciousness is on a very different plane than most material reality. Since we generally grant that rocks and plants don't really have consciousness or awareness, these properties must have emerged on a very different and more fundamental level in evolution, maybe in a field similar to the quantum field, or one like dark matter even, that influences our material universe, but from the outside. We at Axiom think there's plenty of possibility that what we describe as awareness, consciousness, or experience itself can't really be described using material words. Even if the brain is necessary for consciousness to experience anything, as it appears to be, that doesn't mean that the brain is experience itself. You'll never be able to point to a neuron, a dendrite, or really anything in the material universe and go, there, that's experience, that's a thought, or that's a feeling. The experience of our material world will always still be separate from the material world. Under this view, we would expect that there is some amount of predictability to human actions, that you would be able to see some amount of material activity correlated with conscious activity. And to the degree that we are always thinking about something, you will probably even see that mirrored in the brain. The free will theory posits that, even given complete knowledge of the material universe and laws that govern it, you will never be able to perfectly predict the actions of a conscious agent. That is because, like the quantum field or the universe itself, its causality is just up to itself. Likewise, your mind makes its own decisions, autonomously. While it considers information when making decisions, it's still capable of making better or worse decisions given that information. And the starting point for that causal chain literally begins with the mind. This does not mean we should stop learning about the universe or psychology. Just because you are the main factor in your decision-making doesn't mean you don't care about what possible other factors are influencing your choices that you're less aware of. It's obviously still worthwhile to conduct these neurological or sociological studies to better understand how we ourselves think and how we should interact with the world. Okay, let's look back a bit. We've just responded to many of the assumptions and claims from the deterministic view, and explained why we believe there's actually still plenty of room for free will. But at some point, we need to ask ourselves why this even matters. And here's where we're going to take a bit of a possibly anticlimactic take. It kind of doesn't. Because, think about it. Both determinists and free will advocates use the word you when saying things like, you should go to the store, or you shouldn't have taken that job. Both camps think understanding the universe as much as possible is a worthy endeavor. And what's more, it seems that both sides are incapable of escaping the belief that we do have some kind of free will and autonomous control over our actions. Maybe some think we can step outside this for a minute to see that we are really just puppets on strings, like a rock or car engine. But we quickly revert back to thinking and speaking practically the same way. And under either view, the goal of this thing we call our mind is to pursue happiness. Whether we are truly in control of the route we take to get there, or whether the route we take was determined at the beginning of time, minds still seem to gravitate toward those stimuli which they report as and describe using the word happiness. That instinct, whether determined or not, is pretty darn inescapable. The main thing this affects is how we talk about if people are capable of going against that nature. If people can consciously choose unhappiness, and that is what we usually describe as evil. Going against the good or happy route in favor of a more short-sighted path, which actually creates suffering. The deterministic way of viewing this may just be that people sometimes act in ways that create suffering, and thus should be restrained to that extent. Either way, until we understand everything that causes humans to make the choices we do, we will continue using language like, "You did a good job." Linguistically, the buck will always stop at you. Here at Axiom, we will be proceeding under the model that we have just described. We will be using free will terminology to refer to how minds work, how people interact, and in our next video, how it applies to ethics and morality. We don't claim this issue is completely settled, either for or against free will, but we certainly believe the reasons against free will are often overstated, while the reasons for it are often overlooked. But ultimately, we enjoy this debate, and we expect we haven't gotten the final word in just by making this video. From psychology to philosophy, science to relationships, politics, history, technology, and several other subjects, we have more episodes on the way. But Axiom is more than just a podcast. The Axiom community is a form of support for those participating. So to join one of our weekly discussions on TikTok or leave feedback, simply leave a comment or email the address in the description. As always, thank you for being a part of this community. We hope whatever support you can offer is returned to you, and that you find value in building your understanding of the world from the axiom out to every other subject in life. See you next time.